received a call informing me about a falling accident involving my husband, Mike. Panicked, I rushed to the hospital, where the doctor conveyed that the surgery was successful, but Mike hadn't regained consciousness. The uncertainty of when or if he would wake up weighed heavily on me, and I collapsed in despair. The next day, my nephew Tyler, whom I hadn't seen in years, visited the hospital room. He handed me a letter that Mike had left with him a while back, insisting I read it alone. As I read the letter, I discovered an astonishing confession from Mike. To confirm its authenticity, I examined an unconscious Mike and found evidence supporting the letter's contents. Unbeknownst to me, Mike's secret was exposed, leading to unforeseen developments. Mike and I had married early, supported by our strong connection. As I began to enjoy my work, I expressed my desire to continue working after marriage, and we mutually agreed to support each other. Over the years, our bond remained close. Before turning 30, we both desired children, actively trying to conceive. The sudden passing of Mike's voluntarily institutionalized father, whom we had regularly visited, shocked us. Struggling with the loss, we could barely eat. Mike regretted not insisting on living together, and we wanted to repay the debt owed to his father for the support we received in the early years of our marriage. However, a complicated family dynamic unfolded after Mike's mother-in-law's death. Mike's older sister, whom we had hardly met, was more concerned about the inheritance than her grieving father and us. She demanded her share before the funeral, and to pacify her, Mike's father gave her severance money under the condition that she never contact him again. Mike and I were not informed about the sale of his parents' house, making it likely his sister didn't know about it either. Concerned about potential future troubles, we decided to contact her and distribute the assets equally to prevent disputes. The challenge, though, was the absence of a clear will from Mike's father-in-law, who had intended to meet with a lawyer before his sudden demise. Mike called his sister to inform her about their father's death and the funeral arrangements, but the conversation turned sour when she demanded her share of the inheritance without expressing any condolences. Frustrated but trying to remain calm, Mike discussed the inheritance distribution, learning about his sister's recent divorce. He was particularly concerned about his nephew, her son, but the conversation was dominated by the contentious inheritance issue. After the call, Mike was visibly upset and worried about potential disruptions at the funeral, reminiscent of his mother-in-law's funeral. I consented to remain silent as Mike wished. The days following the funeral were consumed by various procedures, and during this time, his sister called almost daily regarding the inheritance. Initially, Mike patiently explained, but gradually he started to ignore her calls, growing tired of the constant disruptions. Eventually, he decided to meet her, and surprisingly, she became quite cheerful about the situation. Feeling uneasy, I wanted to accompany him, but he insisted on facing her alone. For the past 2 years, I have been involved in handling all the arrangements after the deaths of Mike's parents. Mike, however, believed it wouldn't be right to further involve me in dealing with his sister and the inheritance distribution. He assured me he could handle it and requested that I not worry. Trusting his judgment, I decided to wait and observe how things would unfold. Initially planning to join him, a sudden increase in work at my company made it impossible to match his schedule, and Mike ended up meeting her alone as planned. On the day of the meeting, my work was incredibly busy, and during my break, I couldn't help but worry about Mike. Trying to focus on work, I believed that no news was good news. Suddenly, my phone rang, displaying an unknown number with the hospital's name. Though hesitant, I answered, and the nurse confirmed the hospital's name. Learning about Mike's urgent situation, I left work immediately. Upon arriving, I discovered Mike undergoing emergency surgery. The nurse explained his critical condition and sought my consent for the procedure. Overwhelmed, I signed various documents, and the nurse sternly but kindly reminded me to pull myself together, emphasizing that Mike was fighting for his life. Throughout the night, I arranged for Mike's hospital stay and contacted various people. It wasn't until late at night that I could sit beside him, relieved that he was alive. Tears naturally flowed, but I held his hand tightly, hoping for his consciousness to return. However, he remained unresponsive. Around noon the next day, Mike's sister unexpectedly appeared in the room. This was the first time I had seen her since my mother-in-law's funeral. Wondering why she was there, I inquired about how she knew about this hospital. It seemed peculiar as I had not stepped out of Mike's room, making it impossible for her to spot me anywhere else. She assumed Mike was brain dead based on his unconscious state, displaying insensitivity. Despite her lack of concern for his safety or chances of recovery, she demanded compensation for her uninvited visit. To avoid causing a scene in front of Mike, I handed her money and watched her leave the room with an imposing attitude. As she left, she called her son into the room, introducing him as my nephew. Before leaving, she instructed him to look after me. The boy, hesitant at first, approached me and handed me a letter from Mike, stating that it was given without his mother's knowledge. The torn piece of paper seemed to contain an important message from Mike. I quickly perused the letter, discovering that Mike and his sister were initially scheduled to meet at a cafe. However, on the day of their meeting, she unexpectedly called him to her house. Mike, sensing something amiss, decided to document the events while remaining vigilant. The letter revealed a mysterious injury around the time of his mother's death, an incident he had treated himself without my knowledge. As I delved further into the letter, an astonishing story unfolded. During disputes over his mother's inheritance, Mike experienced an odd sensation in his leg after walking through a crowd. To his shock, he found a deep cut on his thigh and a utility knife in his pocket, its blade hidden. His sister now claimed responsibility for the injury, stating she had aimed for an artery in the crowd but failed. She even knew the exact location of the wound. Checking Mike's thigh while he was unconscious, I found the old cut, providing clear evidence of his sister's malicious intent. As anger surged within me, I redressed Mike, focusing on the letter. Mike expressed his conviction that his life was in danger, and he had written the letter hurriedly, while his sister briefly left the room during their inheritance discussion. Oddly, she insisted on having her son present during this discussion, planning to use him as bait in a tearful plea for a larger share of the inheritance. Feeling threatened, Mike had instructed his nephew to give me the letter if anything happened to him. The letter also mentioned evidence in the inner pocket of his jacket. Searching the jacket untouched since the nurse handed it to me, I found a voice recorder. The bloodstains indicated the severity of the accident, and Mike had shielded the recorder to protect the evidence at the risk of his own life. Listening to the shocking contents, I realized it was evidence that could incriminate his sister. In a state of disbelief, I immediately contacted the police. Shortly after, Mike's sister returned cheerfully, claiming satisfaction and demanding the chair I was using. As she casually touched up her makeup, I asked about the outcome of the inheritance distribution. She lied, stating Mike had agreed to give her a larger share. When questioned about the accident, she claimed ignorance. Choosing not to confront her lies immediately, I asked other questions about memories with Mike, their father, her divorce, and her current living situation. Inquiring about the restaurant meeting and subsequent events captured on the voice recorder, she soon became irritated, dismissing my involvement, declaring, "He was my father. You're just an outsider who married into the family." Despite my indirect connection to the inheritance, Mike's life-threatening accident implicated me in a profound way. I implored her to speak the truth, but she responded with visible outrage, asking if I thought she was lying. In response, I played the voice recorder that Mike had risked his life to save. The recording began with Mike expressing concerns about the difficulty of their conversation and his intention to record it as evidence. His sister immediately pressured him for a larger share of their father's inheritance. Initially reserved, she claimed she needed help raising her nephew alone. However, when Mike rejected her suggestion and demanded she ask her ex-husband for child support, her demeanor dramatically shifted. She confessed to inflicting the cut on Mike's thigh during the dispute over their mother's inheritance, admitting she thought it would increase her share. Mike cleverly changed the topic and suggested moving to a public place, inviting her to a nearby fish restaurant. However, her demeanor changed again, and she left to get ready. In that moment, Mike quickly wrote a letter to me, entrusting it to his nephew, and mentioned the voice recorder. hoping I would find it. After leaving her house for a restaurant, Mike treated his sister to lunch. Upon leaving, he suggested consulting a lawyer due to the deadlock in their discussion. When Mike said he was heading home, his sister insisted on accompanying him to the station. During their walk, she tried to dissuade him from involving a lawyer, leading to a commotion and voices calling for an ambulance. The recording stopped, possibly because of the emergency treatment. The sister-in-law initially seemed shocked, then became defiant, dismissing it as a sibling argument unrelated to the inheritance dispute. However, I pointed out that it proved Mike's fall was not an accident, but an incident. The police, who had arrived during her absence, confirmed the contents of the voice recorder. The sister-in-law gasped in disbelief, realizing she couldn't escape accountability. Plainclothes detectives, posing as visitors, blocked the entrance, leaving no easy escape route. As the reality of her actions dawned on her, her arrogant demeanor shifted to fear. The police took her away, dismissing her attempts to deflect responsibility with nonchalant responses. I handed over the voice recorder to the lead investigator. After the sister-in-law's drama subsided, another person appeared, Mike's former brother-in-law. I had called him when contacting the police, and as the nephew saw his father, he exclaimed, "Daddy," leaping into his arms. The former brother-in-law acknowledged me with a nod, embracing his son. This was the first time I had met him since my mother-in-law's funeral. The voice recorder contained the sister-in-law's true feelings about her son, stating she never wanted a child and only gave birth out of obligation. Child care was mostly left to the former brother-in-law, and his parents had often helped. After their divorce, the former brother-in-law assumed he would easily obtain custody of their son. However, driven by a desire for child support, the sister-in-law convincingly portrayed herself as a devoted mother in one custody. Despite having never mistreated their son, her actions were revealed to be routine cruelty, such as depriving him of food and locking him in a closet. Mike's letter disclosed his determination to rescue his nephew from this situation, even at the cost of relinquishing his entire inheritance. Mike believed that offering the entire inheritance would prompt his sister-in-law, motivated by greed, to give up custody of her nephew. This decision was not only about the inheritance, but also about the welfare of his nephew. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I felt compelled to join in the determination to hold the sister-in-law accountable for her actions. The former brother-in-law, witnessing the drastic change in his son, blamed himself for the past. Despite securing a monthly visitation agreement, the sister-in-law consistently denied him access to their son, threatening to cut ties if he persisted. Regretful for not confronting her sooner, the former brother-in-law apologized to his son repeatedly. Determined to rectify the situation, he vowed to confront his sister. The sister-in-law had already been reported not only for the suspicious circumstances surrounding Mike's fall, but also for her mistreatment of the children. The youth division arrived, expressing a desire to hear from the nephew. As a guardian, my presence was required, and I accompanied them to the police station. Mike's recovery was uncertain, but the urgency of the nephew's situation took precedence. At the police station, a confrontation ensued between the former brother-in-law and the sister-in-law. In a moment of distress, she made outrageous accusations, labeling her son as a child of a demon. The police, unswayed by her claims, detained her. With the sister-in-law in custody, the focus shifted to the nephew's custody. Based on recorded statements and the nephew's account, it was decided he should stay with the former brother-in-law. Overjoyed to live with his father, the nephew was now ensured a comfortable life. After the police interrogation, I returned to the hospital, resolved to stay by Mike's side. The next morning, Mike regained consciousness. Following his request, we got the detective to come over, and Mike revealed that he was pushed from behind by his sister. Forensics confirmed her handprints on the jacket he was wearing at the time. Confronted with undeniable evidence, the sister-in-law was arrested. Mike demanded compensation and medical expenses from her, but her financial situation was dire. Eventually, Mike proposed splitting his father's inheritance equally, ensuring compensation and medical expenses. The sister-in-law's money dwindled as she repeatedly fired lawyers, leading to a bleak trial. The nephew's emaciated body recovered, and custody was successfully secured by the former brother-in-law. They are now living peacefully with my ex-father-in-law and his parents. After Mike's discharge, I started feeling unwell, and a checkup revealed we were expecting a new life. We hope to raise our child to always smile and be kind, believing that our happiness is just beginning.